be much more careful. So another hand by the Bostonator. I like that name. I've already run out of water, so I'll have to replace that pretty soon. Okay, so this was Ignition NL50 in a 3-bet pot. Okay. So, let me see. It's a little bit difficult to read. Okay, so we're dealt ace jack. We open under the gun. Yeah. I'm just wait. We are not under the gun. I'm having a little bit of trouble reading this one, guys. EP opens. We 3-bet from button. I don't see how you'd know that from this spot, but okay, fine. Okay, I'll believe you. Button versus, okay, so, all right, boss. Okay, got it. So under the gun opens to 3x, which is not a sizing I'd really recommend, to be honest. On Ignition, maybe slightly more so, but I still wouldn't recommend it. We 3-bet bluff ace jack on the button, which is definitely fine. And get called. Flops queen 4-3. On this board, you could end up range betting. If you assume that villain doesn't call pre-flop with 3s and 4s, which he probably should not. We have pocket queens 100%, whereas he shouldn't really have pocket queens much. I mean, we're 96 big blinds deep, right? If we're maybe 150 deep, it would be a bit more likely. So yeah, I don't mind if you bet third pot. Could even go a bit bigger if you want. And the turn is an 8 of 8. Bring the double flush draw. So if you were to bet on this board, on this card, you'd want to bet very large, right? As in, your value range is looking very good, but you need a ton of protection because of the double flush draw and the overcards and the straight draws and whatnot. So this would be a good example, guys. Okay, on the flop, let's say we bet 100% of the time, right? So we've bet 100% of our flushes. So if let's say the flush gets there on the turn, that's a good card for us because we've got all of them. Whereas villain, villain has flush draws, but he would sometimes check raise them on the flop, right? And on average, our flushes are going to be better than his flushes. So we get this 8 turn, and so now it's important to check back a bit of everything, right? So it's important to check back a hand like pocket queen sometimes because you block a lot of hands that are going to call you when you hold 2 queens. You want to check back some flush draws sometimes, both the gray as well as the yellow one. I don't know which ones those are, but you want to check back a bit both of them, right? So that when the river flush gets there and both of them get there, you still have flushes, right? And on top of that, obviously, you want to check back with more obvious hands, like let's say pocket 10s or 8-7 suited, whatnot. And so the same goes for the ace. So we see in this river, we've got the ace river, right? So we want to check back some hands that connect with this ace. And so in the river, you ask yourself, if we go back, what are you representing? Well, when we're betting this river, when we bet this river, we're representing ace king, ace queen, not so much really. We would almost always bet the turn. So we're representing ace king, maybe ace jack, maybe ace 10, maybe ace 5, right? So basically we're saying, again, we've got a pretty good hand, but we don't have like an amazing hand, right? So yeah. So basically the sizing, again, should be pretty good, but not amazing. So for instance, shoving here is not really a play, right? You may have checked back aces on the turn as a trap. But again, aces block so many of the calls, you wouldn't really want to bet large. Ace queen could shove, but again, ace queen would usually bet right on the turn. Queens, again, block a lot of queens that villain may look us up with. So the hands that are good enough to shove with block villain's calling range. And so the hands that you'd want to bet are more like ace 4, right? Ace 4 is a good hand. Ace king. So all in all, we bet 23 into 33, which I think is a great play, right? As in we're saying we've got a good ace or nothing. Or better, of course, right? In case we do have a hand like pocket queens, pocket aces, whatnot. So overall, I think this bet size is actually excellent. So what's important is if we go back, do we fear getting raised? Well, if we go back, yes, we do, right? Villain could have checked ace queen on the river to check raise all in. Maybe as 3s or 4s at a lower frequency. He could have checked all the flop with pocket 8s, right? So yeah, we somewhat do fear getting raised, which means that you have to not go that large and not be too aggressive. Is my range protected? Yes, right? We're going to have aces and queens here a decent amount of the time. We're also going to have a hand like ace 3 or ace 4 suited sometimes. So yes, your range is protected, making you want to bet a bit more liberally, but you are a little bit afraid of getting raised. Not super afraid. We're not getting raised too much on this card, but sometimes, right? And how strong are we? Well, we're pretty strong, but not insanely strong, right? So you can probably tell from the tone of my voice, like I'm pretty happy, but I'm not that happy, right? So I think the 23 into 33 bet size represents that amount of happiness, let's say, pretty well. So I like this play, right? So, and then let's say once we get shoved on, I would say at NL50 against the average opponent, this would probably be a fold. There's no real difference between a hand like ace king and ace jack. They're both one pairs that don't really block the nuts very well. Hand like ace four substantially better. Not only do we maybe occasionally beat ace king, which I don't think is realistic, but at least we block pocket fours, right? If we have a hand like ace eight, right, that's the hand I've even mentioned. That's one of your best calling hands, because not only do you now beat some kind of lower two pair, whatnot, or ace king potentially, but also you block pocket eights. So if I had ace eight, I would definitely be calling. But the point is, guys, again, we go for this medium to large bet size because we're representing a medium to good hand, right? So let me look at the notes. I thought I should range bet 1/3 because my range performs well on a Broadway low board. That's generally correct, unless you believe that, let's say, villain calls too many of the pocket threes to pocket fours. On the turn, I wanted to polarize my range, and ace jack seems to merge it because I still beat some flush draws and floats. I wouldn't really count on showdown value in this spot. But at the same time, yeah, there's a lot of obvious high equity bluffs to have, right? So I don't think we need to go super wide here. What at least you'd want to do is have good blockers to the suited queens. And on the river, I want to get value from hands like king queen suited and queen jack suited. So I went for 3/4 pot to target this part of his range. Yeah, queen jack, king queen, maybe queen 10, perhaps hand like an ace high flush draw, hand like ace 10 type of stuff. You know, that type of, yeah, sure. But I would also prefer ace king and not have a spade. As I said, I don't think ace king is that much different, right? So yeah, it's one better than ace jack, but it's still a good hand that has no blockers to check raises. And I also think population massively under bluffs here and could possibly just fold everything except for sets and two pairs, which I probably agree with. So yeah, I think overall your hand was played quite well. I like it. Let me look at some questions. Should out of position have a betting range in this river? Not a very wide one, Eric, because obviously this ace is good for a check behind range. But yes, he should have one. And the reason is, especially, Eric, on the river, this is important because if you don't have a betting range in the river, you let your opponent end the hand very cheaply. Well, for free, basically, right? Because he can just check behind. So yes, there's some spots where, let's say, you can check range on the turn, right? Let's say villain checks behind, and let's say the turn is an ace. You could check real range if you want, but on the river, this is not much of a thing because at least on the turn, he can check back again, but then he still has to worry about the river. But if you don't have a betting range yourself on the river, then villain can just end the hand, and then you're sitting there with your pocket fours, and then you don't get any value. Now, pocket fours as a check raise is a fantastic play, but no, you cannot just check your whole range on this river. But yeah, I would imagine that our betting range for out of position is maybe like 25% wide. So it's not very aggressive, obviously. What do you do when your perceived range is weak, but you actually have a very strong hand that you slow played? Well, so then you'd probably go for small bets, Luis, because that allows you to basically you stay in trouble. You stay kind of out of trouble against the really good hands. At the same time, you get value from a lot of the weaker hands in this range, like still decent hands. And obviously, you would still do a lot of checking, right, Luis? So let's say an out of position spot, if he has pocket fours, as I said, check raising is a great play. You unblock a lot of villains' betting range, both bluffs and value hands, and then you can check raise. And then next time, Bostonator will think twice about value betting ace jack, right? Because obviously he doesn't want to bet fold or have to bet call and lose potentially. I'll stop your video for you. There you go. A good question, Luis. When we see bet full range, our flushes are a small portion of our overall range. Not necessarily, Pablo. And even if villain check raises some flush draws, he is folding a lot of air hands. But when we mix, our betting range has a big proportion of flushes. Therefore, isn't a flush better? Therefore, isn't a flush turn better when we mix to when we bet? Well, if you say that sure we don't have many flushes, okay, fine. But if we do have a decent amount of flushes, which I believe is true, then if we bet 100% of our flush draws on the flop, and the turn brings the flush, then we have all of the flushes, right? Except for the one that is not blocked by the board. So if you're three betting almost exclusively offsuit hands, then sure, that could be true. But that probably means that you're not three betting enough suited hands yourself, Pablo. Would you call any ace X? Naked one pairs. I mean, probably not without a read, Joe. Obviously, there's a big difference between like ace eight and ace king, right? Not only one pair versus two pair, but also blocking pocket eight, which is one of the main hands that he's got for value. Apart from ace king suited and ace jack suited flush draws, which might be checked on the turn, which flush draws? Generally, you'd want to check back. You want to check back quite a few flush draws. So we can, for instance, have like 8-7 of diamonds, or what? Let's call the white stuff diamonds, right? A bit of everything. So ace king of diamonds could be checked back as well. What you could check behind is some weaker flush draws as well. So basically, hands that, let's say you've got like 6-7 of diamonds, right? You've got a gut shot and a decent a bad flush draw basically, and you really wouldn't like to get check raised. So we should check back all kinds of flush draws here. Obviously, not only weak ones. Over better check for out of position. I think a block put is also a decent size in the ad, Andre. If the turn is the ace of diamonds, would you rather check or bet? With ace jack specifically, with a decent ace, I would probably end up checking. You know, there's still a lot of flushes on board for imposition. So if you wanted to bet, you'd probably bet small, David, because now you force villain to call with weaker hands. If out of position check raise exclusively 3x, 4x region, that's hard to say, Eric. I mean, how do you call a three bet under the gun versus button with a 3 or a 4 unless you have ace 3, ace 4? So it's kind of difficult to guess what he's bluffing with. He might even just turn a random pair into a bluff, even though he has no blockers. Having the jack of the gray suited factor for folding as it blocks his flushes. I wouldn't think it's much of a, doesn't matter too much, Daniel. If let's say villain had jack 10 of, let's say call it diamonds, he'd probably just lead the river as a bluff, right? So, and if he didn't, that's a really poor bluffing hand. So I don't think it's too important, to be honest. I don't think it's really a bad blocker to have this time. How about he's probably never bluffing and has some percentage spaz? Well, you're kind of contradicting yourself now, Mamadou. What would you bluff as villain? That's a bit of a different topic, Jonqui. We can quickly get into that. Generally, if you run out of obvious bluffs, like, let's say like counterfeit two pair type of hands, you'll just have to end up bluffing with hands that do a good job of blocking your opponent's calling range. Let me see. Does a villain turn a queen into a bluff? We'll have to ask him, but probably not. A lot of people just play call or fold with a hand like that. How does the flop bet sizing affect the river frequency and sizing? Good question, Lucky. In this spot, it's not that relevant because the pot is already quite large, but generally, the more polarized you are on the flop, the bigger you bet, right? Which means that on the river, both ranges are going to be much tighter, which generally means that bigger bets make sense. So if ranges are both very wide, there's only a very small percentage of hands that's very strong, so there's not as much big betting going on. But if both of your ranges are very strong, there's more polarized betting going on, so larger betting at a lower frequency. So very good question. Okay. So got a question for you. Quiz time. What is the most common type of bet sizing when we bet check bet? When bet check betting. So is it A, a small bet? Is it B, a medium or a large bet? So think maybe something, between 50 and 100% pot. A or C, an overbet. What is the most common sizing you would see? Obviously, in general, right? If you had to pick. Obviously, in some spots, all three of them can be most common, right? It just depends on the spot. But in most spots, which is the most common sizing? A, B, or C? B, B, B. Well, it's kind of boring if everybody says B. B, B, B. Well, Okay, we got a D. All right. Goran says C. Okay. The most common one is, I wanted it to be turn orange. Green it is. B, medium or large. Okay, that's correct. What is the, okay, I'll throw in a little bit of a wrench. What is the second most common sizing? A small bet, so let's say call that third pot, or let's call it, or an overbet, which is obviously over 100% pot. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of A's and then a C for sure. So it's tough. What's the answer? By a much more narrow margin, I would say the answer is C. That was not an official question. I just threw that in there, but it's C. Yeah. Small betting in position generally doesn't make as much sense on the river as it would do on the flop. On the flop, there's definitely the most amount of small betting going on. On the turn, generally we tend to bet bigger or check, right? You know that. Like oftentimes we go like third pot over bet. You know that's a common line. On the river, on the river, small betting doesn't really make as much sense, especially after bet. It doesn't make sense because your range is already polarized. If you wanted to bet small, it would be with a bet check bet line, right? That would be more common because you could be wrapping a thin value hand. But since you can end the hand, it doesn't work as well. So are there spots where I bet third pot in position on the river? Yes, occasionally, sure. In a regular like bet, sure. But there's more over bet spots where the river like significantly improves our range compared to his. I'll give you a really good example of an overbet spot. This is a really sweet play. I've been using it for years, and sometimes I see, it's really fun when, let's say, you see a really good player not do something that you're doing, and all of a sudden he starts doing it, and then you believe he stole it from you. I think there's a couple of really good guys who stole this from me. It's not a crazy play that I invented or anything, but imagine what you do is you see with the flop full range and the turn, and you check back the turn. Let's say the flop is like Queen 4-3, you see bet range to keep it simple, and the turn is an 8, right? Rainbow. You check behind with, let's say, your 8, and the river's another 8. That's a great spot for an overbet because if you see bet the flop full range, so you see bet quite a few 8s. On the turn, there's no real value, so you check behind virtually always. And then on the river, you've got trips. But also, it's a trips that your opponent can't really have because on Queen 4-3, villain will have trips with an ace, right? Because he calls ace high or king high. Or maybe on the 4, right? Because he called with a 4 on the flop. And if there's another 4, he has got trips. But what kind of 8 is villain calling with on the flop? Virtually none of them, right? But how many 8s are we checking behind on the turn? A lot of them. So on this river, we obviously have a lot of hands that would want to bet some kind of medium-large sizing because they're just a pretty good hand. Let's say like whatever, pocket 10s, a weak queen, pocket 7s, whatnot, like a pretty good hand. But then we also have a massive trips advantage. And since villain didn't check raise the flop, he probably doesn't have 4s or 3s. So we have a big trips advantage. And then you could actually go for a 2x pot sizing. Now, if let's say it's on the ace, not as much, right? Because villain will often call ace high in the flop, and then obviously have trips on the river. But especially on like let's say like an 8 or a 9, that would work very well. So that's a cool play to have. And let's say 2x spot would be a cool sizing. Yeah, so that's a fun play to have in your arsenal. And again, it makes you unpredictable, right? People don't expect that type of stuff, so they probably don't check strong enough and prepare for that. All right, let's do some more content and we'll answer questions shortly. So the next subtopic is mixing various types of hands. It is important to be covered on every type of runouts. So as I said before, if we are covered by checking back a lot of 8s, we can actually make that overbet, right? Second, what if my opponents don't apply pressure? And this is a very common question I get, right? So people correctly say like, hey, this is all cool theoretical stuff, but my opponents are nets. Hey, I play, let's say in the previous, example, we saw, okay, NL50 on ignition, my opponents don't really bluff, right? To say, yeah, I mean, this is all cool in theory, but I don't think it's applicable. So if you believe that your opponents are not aggressive enough, whatnot, mixing it up to, let's say, bluff catch is not as important, right? Because, I mean, if you're not covered, your opponent is not going to do as much about it as he should. But so that's on defense. But on offense, it's very important, right? So let's say let's say on queen 4-3, you never, and the turn is an 8, you never check back an 8. If let's say villain block bets river, you'll never get to raise him because you don't have any trips or you don't have any strong queens to check behind with, right? You have to mix it up in order for you to attack, right? So even if your opponent doesn't go ahead and bet 3x pot on flush runouts and whatnot, which I think a lot of your opponents will not, right? A lot of you guys listening don't have many opponents who do that. That does not mean that you should not mix it up. It does become a little bit less important, sure, but it still means you have to mix it up because you get to attack that way now. Anyway, let's do another hand. And by the way, guys, I asked for hands a few times. There was nothing. And then I sent a slightly nicer message in the chat and everybody started sending hands. I'm trying to teach you guys something. I'm trying to make you better, right? I've seen very good plays. I've seen small mistakes. Even if you completely mess up a hand, I don't care. We're here to learn, right? So if you send me a hand, like don't send me a hand where you play perfectly and you ran it in Pio. Don't be afraid to send hands at all, right? For each of these sessions, we'll need between like 2 and 5 hands. Don't be afraid to send them. We actually need them. So you're actually helping yourself and everybody else. So don't be afraid to actually help contribute and send hands. And obviously, you know, it makes things more personal because obviously these are hands that you guys are having trouble with. And so, you know, the advice is more personal when it's related to actual stuff that you guys got into. Okay, so this is actually an anti-game, okay? So that makes things a little bit different, in fact, actually quite different. So that means that everybody's going to be much looser. We open in the small blind. We are Pawn Star. Love that name, by the way. I watch Pawn Stars. I'll watch all the highlight clips on YouTube. It's a good show. Anyway, so you open in a small blind. No. It's not correct. So the Y guy opens under the gun, and we 3-bet in the small blind. Okay, I got it now with pocket tens. And we see a queen 8-8 flop, right? So it's very important to break it down. Like, how many 8s does in position have? Probably 7-8, maybe 9-8. Pocket queens this deep, 200 big blinds deep. Yeah, probably will have pocket queens, right? As in definitely not aces, probably not many kings, but some. And then they obviously have like jacks and tens and nines and a lot of the lower pairs and a lot of the suited connectors and king 10 suited and whatnot. So if you're going to bet, betting small is definitely the play. We checked the turn 3. I don't think there's a particularly much value anymore. Villain can have jacks and queens and whatnot, and it goes check, check. So once it goes check, check, you have to imagine you have the best hand most of the time, right? And so on the river, we end up block betting. And I think that's a great play. So on this river, again, if we go all the way back, right? What are you representing on this river? You're representing decent hands, right? You're representing hands like tens, maybe jacks, maybe queen jack suited, right? So basically you're representing pretty good hands. A lot of the hands that are much better would have bet the turn. A lot of the hands that are much better than that have terrible blockers, right? So let's say you've got pocket queens here. You wouldn't want to bet large because, I mean, what the hell's going to call you? Let's say you bet like 50 blinds on the river. I mean, an 8 is unlikely because the villain checked behind the turn. So, and you have 2 queens in your hand, it's so likely villain has pocket 5s. And then if you block bet, he may call 5s. But if you bet big, then he just folds, right? So you're trying to find a sizing that puts his weaker to medium strength hands in the tough spot with your medium to strong hands, right? And so I think this block bet is very nice. This makes a lot of sense. Ideally, what you'd want is have blockers to queens and suited. That's a hand he will obviously check behind on the turn and never fold on the river against a small bet. So we actually see a raise by the Y guy. And you have to think, like, what is this guy representing, right? So here, it's important to mix it up. It's important to check hand like queens on the turn sometimes, or hand like pocket aces on the turn sometimes, or queen jack suited on the turn sometimes. So when you get raised here, you're not hopelessly behind. So villain is mostly, I mean, he might have pocket 4s for value here. Other than that, he's mostly representing pocket queens that he trapped with, or he's representing hand like king queen, which didn't want to bet, but feels can raise here. So he's really not repping a whole lot, right? Like, let's say pocket queens, always call pre, always call flop. You know, let's say 3 combos. Let's say he plays like 2 of them this way. So he's got like two combinations of pocket queens on this river. And then maybe he has like, let's say out of pocket fours, maybe he has like, two of them. So that's four combinations. And then maybe let's give him like four more combos of random queens that he raised. So he's got like 8 combinations for value, right? Which means he gets to have like 3 bluffs. So if he starts bluffing here with Jack 10 to 9, ace king, maybe that's like king 10, king jack, he's way over bluffing. So, and I think 10s actually will be a call. So I think I think in general, your opponents will under bluff, but in this spot, it's very easy to over bluff. He's not really representing many hands. So I like the call. And so when you mix it up, you also cause these types of spazzes and you can actually make a nice bit of money, right? I think that villain's play is actually pretty sweet. I mean, he blocks the suited queens as well. So king, queen suited, whatnot. So I actually think his play is not bad. It's just very easy to overdo this. So nice hand to you overall. So again, guys, going back, what am I representing? Medium strength hands in a decent sized pot. Do I fear getting raised? A little bit, but not that much, right? Is my range protected? Yes. So basically, again, all of those factors are kind of in the middle. So it makes sense to go for like a decent sized bet. So yeah, I like it. So if let's say if the river won a card on which, let's say, we improve a bunch and he doesn't, right? Then we could bet large. But I mean, think of a card where we really improve and villain doesn't. I mean, an ace or a king, well, villain has his king, you see right here. So not really. A 9, well, he can have pocket 9s or jack 10. Not really. There's not really many cards in which villain doesn't really improve, but you do. Even if, let's say, ace king made a straight here, right? We're so deep. I mean, he can easily have ace king. So I'd say on this river, you'd want to do a combination of both block betting and maybe big betting. Over betting, not really. So yeah, nice hand. And as you see right here in all 3 hands so far, I've recommended either a block bet or a 3/4 size bet. I also gave you one example as to where to overbet, of course. So, but you do see that this 3/4 type of bet or medium bet is the most common, and this, then you see some block. So basically, guys, in smaller pots, there's more overbetting going. Like there's more overbetting going on when you really improve. If both ranges are quite strong, like here, right, then you want to mostly add blocks. What are some good block betting sizes? Good question, Caesar. If you just stick to around 3rd pot, that's fine. Now, is it sometimes closer to quarter, whatnot? Sure. But if you stick to around 3rd pot, that's fine with me. What I don't want is that you have like 4 different block bet sizes. That's just way too complicated. How to identify hand classes to be protected. So when you bet a medium size MR, you're obviously betting a medium hand, right? So obviously you don't really want to get raised. Here with pocket 10s, we didn't want to get raised. Sucks. But the point is that we did have some hands that are strong on the check on the turn. And because we checked strong on the turn as well, we have hands that can actually call a raise. Like pocket queens, obviously will even shove over a raise, right? Or pocket aces, which can shove against this raise. Or which can call against this raise, I'm sorry. If let's say Amar, let's say you're in a spot where you're just let's say I put a gun to your head again. I'm putting a lot of guns to your head, right? So sorry about that. But let's say I put a gun to your head and I force you to bet every single flush draw, right, at a certain spot. Now, right, but let's say you don't have a flush draw, so I put the gun down and I let you check. Now in the river, the flush gets there. You will not have any flushes, but villain will, right? Because he'll check back some flushes or call some flushes, whatever the situation is. So the point is that on the river, he'll have a lot more flushes than you, which means that you're not protected, right? So especially if you also don't have like full houses and straights and whatnot, you're not really protected, so you can't really get away with much, right? But since here we are checking hands like top set and whatnot, you are protected. So basically, let's turn it around, right? Let's turn it to imposition. Let's say we call the 3-bet, we call the flop, we call check the turn. Can we just think, oh, it's very easy to just raise this guy off his hand? No, because he knows we can have good stuff, right? I struggle more in single raise pots. We have more hands to go, Amar, so we'll talk about that when they come up. Don't worry about it. We can use a bigger size as well. What bluffs where would you block bet with here? So basically, that's a really good question, Stefan. And I've got a good answer for you. Okay, so Stefan, think about Which hands does villain call against the block bet? Pocket tens is one of them, right? So basically, you want to block hands that villain calls against his sizing. You know, right. So Jack ten suited wouldn't be the worst bluffing hand, right? So I mean, what does villain call river with? Maybe pocket sixes or sevens, eights, nines, tens, jacks, a weaker queen, that type of stuff. So those are the cards you want to have. All right. It's always tricky because I don't know how many slides we have left. I set them all up, but I don't remember how many are left. So you have to be careful not to go too fast. Obviously, also, I don't want to miss any details.